Cooper's Union lives.
Let's get into it. 1, 2, 3.
Ooh, that is tasty. Why, hello, everyone, and welcome to My Whiskey Den, your favorite public access whiskey review show where craft whiskey is king. Tonight, we're going to be talking about what some other shows have been talking about, the possible finally collapse or fading of the whiskey boom a little bit. But we do have a couple of things we're going to be sipping on, nothing too in particular. Mike, I'm sorry, looks like you're writing fever.
I was writing. I stopped writing.
Well, I don't want to interrupt you, but I do want you to tell people about the Bar Cart Co-op.
You're good. I just sharpened my crayon and I had to use it.
Well,
okay.
Is it blue or red?
Sienna.
That fancy 92 pack.
Fancy. Yeah, with the sharpener. All right. We are proud members of the Bar Cart Co-op, which is a collection of friends who create content for the whiskey and other distilled spirits public. The Bar Cart Co-op YouTube and Facebook pages have information about upcoming and past special shows, which happen about every quarter. From blind tastings to distiller panels to discussions of special collaborations and the usage of unique grains. Bar Cart Co-op has educational and fun episodes for your enjoyment. And the oldest show in the group is Distillers Talk, which is hosted by Christy Atkinson and Alan Bishop. It is a conversation with people from distilleries and distillery adjacent that gets into deep and sometimes off the rails and back again discussions with their interviews. New episodes arrive at the end of the work week. And if that one is not nerdy enough, please check out One Piece at a Time Distilling Institute, where, you guessed it, Alan Bishop answers any questions about distilling and often puts them to the test. It could be individual grains, mash bills, equipment, and methodology. New episodes come out randomly, so subscribe. And then we have Bourbon Turntable, where they mix the love of music with the love of whiskey. They have conversations with musicians, writers, distillery folks, and common folks like us about music and whiskey. It releases every Wednesday on all your platforms, including YouTube, and hopefully Mr. Bourbon Turntable himself will chime in on the chat with what are the upcoming shows. Then there is If You Have Ghosts, You Have Everything, which is a show about the spirits and paranormal among us, as well as the unexplained and spiritual. Subscribe on Spotify to get the 4 previous seasons and the 5th that's starting now. And last but not least, we have the Whiskey Ring podcast with Mr. David Levine. David gets into the weeds with his guest. He does all the things that we won't, including have a really good award show and write really good reviews. Yeah.
There it is.
Yeah. I hope that was good enough.
I like it. So I thought it was nice. You said you had that Yak Attack rye over there. Maybe, Mike?
The what?
Yak Attack rye?
Oh, yeah. Sorry. I was thinking of something totally different.
Oh, good. I like to throw a curveball. I had just opened this one because I probably should have before, but I did not. It smelled really dense on the nose out of here, and I took a quick sip rather than waiting like this.
Wow. Right out of the bottle, too.
Mm-hmm. And wow. Like, yeah. I don't want to say not what I don't know what I was expecting, but deep, rich baking spice notes, almost like a gingerbread in there for a second. A little light effervescence, orange, lemon zest on the back end, and like graham cracker for me on the tongue right now on the finish. It was more than I was expecting, kind of off the bat. So I'm sorry. I was expecting to get all eyes lit up for a second there.
Get all emotional.
I was. I almost got a tear. That's if you get 2 tears. That's
just stay away from the 3-tier system.
Mm-hmm.
LOL.
It's good life advice.
Well, as long as you can try to.
Yeah.
Ooh, shit. I moved the wrong thing. Sorry about that.
Well, I'm sipping on a Jephthah Creed sample that I know nothing about other than it is red, white, and blue corn provided by Mr. Mitch and Miss Morgan.
Well, I like the USA color thing. I'm going to guess it was probably a 33, 33, 33 just because that's what a lot of people will do. Well, grab me. Sorry, this one's grabbing me by the throat. I can feel it kind of down in my stomach, like warming me up. This is a nice winter whiskey.
Nice. That's coming up probably next after this one.
Yeah, whenever is fine. So, but like I was going to say, we were going to talk a little bit about a couple of the spirit collapses and kind of where the direction of the overall industry was heading in the last, let's say, 2 years. Up until then, I mean, you had some pretty, I would call it 5% a year would be solid growth for like 4 or 5 years in a row. Most industries would be pretty happy with that. Then in 23, there was a little bit of a downtick, and 24, it kind of doubled up a little bit from what the previous year was as far as the decreases were. But one of the interesting things I found when looking at some of the data was they were talking about the biggest drop was whiskeys that were, let's say, $20 or under. They had a price for it, but about $20 or under. And I was like, well, that's because they don't exist anymore. They're just not there. They've moved up to the next tier level, which seems to be about 30, is where the next tier level cuts off. And that had shown growth over the last like 2 years where everything else was down. I'm like, well, all you kind of did for part of it was take the ones that were in the lower end and move them up the bracket. So yeah, that explains, 6% missing here and 6% going here. Just because you moved the price point. I almost think there needs to be a readjustment of what low end is, what premium, and what above 100 is. Because above 100 is where the biggest growth was. I think it was like 12%, and they were expecting that to kind of continue for like the next 10 years. And I'm like, well, yeah, that's because the prices of everything have gone up. But compared to where it was when you made that, Eagle Rare was probably $30 at that price, back then. And when you made this and you had a whole slew that was 20 and under, you don't have a whole, you have a shelf now. They're probably half a bottom shelf, where before it was a whole bottom shelf. That might have been 20 or under. So I almost feel like there should be a reevaluation of how they're classifying the price points. If they do it to houses and they uptick and they do it everywhere else, I feel like that needs to be taken into this at some point when they're saying that, because to me, that's common sense. Is like, well, yeah, 6% left here and went here, so that's not really growth anywhere. That's just switching the price point. So that was my first thing by looking at that, some of that data, where I was like, well, yeah, it's down a bit, but some of it's kind of shifted where just the price point of some whiskeys are. So that's, I don't know. I just thought that needs to be looked at, because you had a whole section that wasn't lining up. Because 20, how many do you know that are still 20 and under? Like Old Granddad, all the ones in that bracket have got bumped up to above $20. For them,
there's still a few under $20, but it won't last. I mean,
and it's not.
We've seen the prices go up, but the problem is that in any business you're trying to get the highest margin of profit as you can on any product that you put out. But then you have specific reasons that you have certain labels that you make. Like you might make Bookers, but you also make Old Crow. So you have a business model for what goes into Old Crow currently versus what works its way through and goes to, makes its way into a Booker's or some other special release. Same thing with any other distillers you've got, except for small distillers. Small distillers they got to use up everything because there is no waste. There's no scale that you can use to get rid of that stuff. But one of the things that I found really interesting was I listened to an interview that was it was either last night or really early this morning on Whiskey Cast. He was talking with Brown Foreman, and they were talking about their earnings and how they had predicted already for 25 that the sales were going to be down. And they brought up, the tariffs in the past and what that had done to business. But their business, Brown Foreman, also has tequila and also has other spirits that are regional, as in not in the United States. And so they said that alone they're trying to get, because that's going to affect all their other stuff. I mean, if they end up where now all of a sudden their tequila is going to be they're going to have to either eat it to be competitive, eat it somewhere else in their portfolio so they can be competitive, so that way they can sell their tequila when other people's tequila is going to be hit with the tariffs. But he said on there that when they knew the tariffs were happening the last time, they prepared for it, and they've been preparing for it to happen again. And then we'll find out if it happens in March. But we all know if they plan on doing things that are going to raise prices in March, they ain't dropping them.
No,
it's not going to happen. So, it's something's going to have to give in their in their portfolio, or we're just going to pay for it. Well, as a larger producer of them doing it, a smaller distillery just isn't going to do that. No, they can't.
And I was going to say almost like switching. You almost think, knowing that's going to happen, do you see totes leaving on freighters early, mass production beforehand?
Well,
I would. But from now,
but there's going to be a problem with that. Is that if a lot of people do that, that's an exodus from multiple distilleries going on within a short window. Which, if you're in the market to buy, cool, because there's going to be a lot of it out there. If that's what happens, if people we got to get rid of this product and we got to, it's got to go.
Well, I mean, even the big ones.
Right, that's what I'm saying. But you could see a bunch of product in a few years of stuff from a large distiller that you got for a deal, but there's no guarantee that the market's going to be there for that in a couple of years. Even though if you go through and you buy a buttload of a Beam or a Heaven Hill product, hoping that you can flip it.
I was more thinking of what you were talking about, let's say rum for one of the bigger brands, and bringing that into the U.S., trying to bring as much as I can in now before the tariffs would hit. I'm like, you thought production was slow. No, we're ramping it up until this hits, and then we'll go back to normal, or maybe a little bit less afterwards. But until this hits, I want to try to get as much on the boat or over here before it happens.
Yeah. So, well, Mitch, asking you as someone who worked for a very large distillery, what did you see with them planning ahead? Because it was just basically distill for a long time. But
so Heaven Hill has cut back several years ago, actually. So my job no longer exists, relief supervisor. Basically, they predicted the bubble, or I'll just go ahead and say this. I believe this is a bubble. It is in the process of bursting, and we will see the decline now. They did not predict that it was a bubble. They predicted that it was sustainable growth. So it was distill all you can to meet the future demand of all of this. And then 2 or 3 years ago, it was ooh, that's not sustainable. So they cut back 2 days a week from 24/7 to 24/5. Right. So
no one ever thinks of getting rid of that third shift. Sorry.
So, they didn't have a third shift, right? They just took their 3 shifts and were like, you're working 2 more days. Thanks. So it is what it is. So the big guys have known about this for years, right? Like Heaven Hill doesn't find something out that Brown Foreman and Jim Beam can't figure out on themselves, right?
Yeah.
So they have been rolling back production for years. I can say that some folks overseas are like trying to get ink on paper on certain deals really, really soon before March because they do expect tariffs to come in. And it's global economy. Things are going to be hard to predict for a guy in Nebraska who isn't really talking to him that much, right? But, it could be one of those things where they just ship the alcohol over and bottle it here in America because they can ship the alcohol really soon. And then, it's like, okay, well, it's a lot easier to ship a tote of alcohol than it is a pallet of glass bottles with, whiskey or rum or tequila into it, which would be great for the American economy, getting some bottling jobs. But it's also possible that they're just like, hey, forced overtime from now till March. And they'll send it over and they'll tell their distributors, deal with it. Like, hey, if you want to distribute our product, we're going to send you double what we normally would because we expect tariffs. And if there are no tariffs, we're really sorry. You're still going to take our product because we're Diageo or we're whoever. And we just won't send you any for a little bit. And you'll sell through your stock.
Mm-hmm. To get things out in the chat, I'm going to start at the bottom. Kevin brings up, most of the big ones, no, they're not at risk for shutting down, where medium-sized ones. But the other one you bring up there is ones that were purchased. Those are the ones that we've seen one or two of them kind of eliminate themselves recently. I was going to say the mid-sized ones are always going to I don't know. Would you think Wilderness Trail? I think is on the higher side of things. I'm trying to find someone that seems
I would think they are, but Wilderness Trail also had
they're huge.
They're big, but with their plan of contract distilling, which makes them very sustainable. Because
and there's a lot of other
they don't have to worry about their brand as much as they have to worry about,
Also, Wilderness Trail sold to Suntory, so
right,
they're not going anywhere. So, Daniel Whittington said, God, however many years ago when I took Psalm Level 1, he was like, when this does finally turn down, there are going to be two groups that fail, because realistically, selling whiskey or selling any spirit is about making good product and advertising it well. And there are people who do both really well. There are people who do one or the other really well. And there are people who do neither really well. And the people who do neither are going to be the first to drop, right? It's just going to be like, yeah, your crappy whiskey that nobody knew about isn't selling. Goodbye. And then there's going to be people, which is, if I'm 100% honest, Kentucky Owl, right? When Dixon Dedman was there, they had amazing whiskey, but then he left and Stoley took over, and their whiskey no longer supported the price, in my opinion. So they had great advertising, the kind of crap whiskey, and they're gone now because advertising couldn't carry the brand.
Well, the brand didn't carry the name.
Yeah,
the name was supposed to be this when I got it. If I'm paying $125 to $200,
easily for a bottle.
You better
me. It has to be worth the price.
Yeah,
that's the thing. It's got to be worth the price, and it was a high price of entry to begin with, but arguably worth it, depending on
which release.
Yeah,
but I think Waterford faced the same but opposite problem because they had a very high entry point, right? Like a bottle of Waterford near me was $100. Right. That's their entry point. So they didn't have a way to get people into it. And realistically, Waterford's thing was, hey, try multiple of these whiskey and compare them because they're all from different farms. So if you really wanted to get into Waterford, you were looking at a $300 investment to get into it. And they didn't advertise well enough to make me, or apparently enough people, really want to spend $300.
Yeah, and there, that's one. I was paying a lot of attention to that because I've never bought a bottle of water for that reason. It's too high of a test, to see if you're even going to like it. I love the idea of it. I think it's really cool. I think it's nerdy as hell, and I think it has the potential to really shine the light on the importance of grain and where things are grown, and let people know that rye is not rye, barley is not barley. There's other factors involved there. But it was really, really high to get into that. I got to try it a couple times. I was glad I didn't pay the money. But one thing I thought was very interesting is that they kind of had, the founder, Mark Ranier, had, his plan was that they were going to have all these stocks and just build stocks, and they were borrowing money and building stocks and just having all this. So then they would have these stocks that they could sell off, or that these, stocks that they would have for years and for aging. And I don't know what switched. I don't know if it was other people involved that were making the cost what it was, as far as, like, instead of doing 375s or even 200 mils, so you could test and
That's
test
just
that.
what I was going to say. That
Yeah,
my
instead
model,
of it's full 700 mil bottles for that price for a very young whiskey that only showed potential. But that's a lot of money to spend on showing potential that people are not going to do that. They're not going to spend the money on doing that kind of money for that young a whiskey. And then, or they'll try it and go, it's not that good. They ain't coming back.
well, knowing the purpose of what you were going for was almost to compare and shed a light on different grains and comparison. I would go more of the tasting route set, where that's my business model, is to sell you 375s or 200 milliliter ones. If you want to buy the big one, that's fine. But my goal is to be at classes, going someplace, having 20, 50 people go to a class, selling sets. And then my goal, maybe they only buy sets from that on afterwards. Maybe they buy a big bottle, because you're talking about the cost. But if I'm spending $100 and I get to have like a mini class with 2 or 3 people, I feel better about it. I mean, or, a tasting between us, that's not terrible. But like you said, $300 in, and if it's iffy,
Yeah. That's, I agree. There was, I know that it's cost prohibitive to bottle a lot of small bottles, because the glass cost is the glass, everything, it's going to be high. I mean, it doesn't, the cost of that doesn't scale up to equal what the 700 mil bottle is, or the 750 for the times they were coming to the States. It does not scale up to equal that. You are paying way more money for that small bottle, and you have to shipping, packaging, everything else. But I think a lot more people would have bought those to try the stuff out, as opposed to waiting and like, well, I just spent $100 on a bottle that's okay. Do I want to try the other one to see if it's different or if it's just okay? Because that's another $100.
Mm-hmm.
It's a good looking bottle, but
so you're almost saying the quality didn't meet the same thing with Kentucky out after Dixon left.
well, I mean,
you're paying them up,
think
but I'm not hitting. Well, maybe if it had been stuck around longer and had a 6-year release of some of the stuff, or older releases as you saw it develop, maybe you had something more of that.
Yeah,
nature.
Appease people for the time while it's aging. Appease people with smaller sets, or sell new make. Sell new make on there just to appease. Yeah, let people know this is what we're doing. Get people excited instead of saying, "Here's $100." You're probably not gonna like it.
Well, the new make's a whole nother step in the process too. That's another one you can add to the tasting set. Look at Santa Fe Spirits. I believe that's change names and stuff now, but look at how their the actual base was when they finally released it, and you're like, what the fuck happened? You know, like it was so completely different from the Cole Keegan stuff that you had that was smoked, and then you have this, and it's like I would never have. I don't want to say it was completely different, but it was a much cleaner. It was a wholly different type of whiskey in my mind. It was like tasting a scotch and then peating it and changing it, torquing it, and I'm like, who knew the smoke had such a significant flavor? I didn't know something so sublime and beautiful was underneath that in its own right before doing that, because I had so much respect for the smoked version and everything like that. The unsmoked was fantastic in its own right, to the point where if I had made that, I might not have fucked with the smoke. I'm like, nope, this is good.
Yeah. But Cole Keegan had 375s early on.
He did, yes.
Yeah.
And it does suck, but I mean, it's sustainability over time and like your purpose for what it is. If you're at some place, the chances of you buying a 375 is a better chance. Like when you go to Whiskey Thief now, I was gonna say I think you could get 375s or the fulls, and with what the cost was on them, I would get 2 375s rather than one full one. I know it was like $10 more, but I think it came out. I'm like, well, I'll still.
It actually works out in theirs. It's actually pretty even. You could get 2 375s I'd say within $5 of buying a 750, but have two completely different whiskeys.
Yeah, and I was like, well, giving people that option, I'm like, obviously I went that way because I have two different memories from when I was there or whatever I had, and you get to pull two things or you get to try more. Because most craft places, the price points are still, a titch higher than everywhere else. There are some distilleries that have stuff down on products pretty well. I will say that to surprising amount sometimes. But, mass production is mass production.
So, I mean, yeah. Well, I would like to go back way.
Sorry, please spin back.
Because Paul asked a question like, how much of it is production in a vacuum? Like people just doing things because that's the way they always did it rather than looking around. And I will say that analytics has taken over business. So if you're one of the big boys, production is not done in a vacuum, often to their detriment. But if you are a smaller producer, production is done in a vacuum. You don't have the time or personnel or anything to do analytics, right? So it's just make this, sell this, try not to die. That's kind of, terrible, but also when you're a small business that's producing whiskey, right, you're not making money for years. So you are doing everything you can to stay alive, not necessarily, and predicting the future is a little out of your reach.
Well, in most businesses, like with whiskey, obviously you jump into other things to try to sustain yourself to that point. But most businesses fail within 5 years. And if you're trying to do bourbon in the U.S., you're in most parts easily for 4 years, mostly, unless you're in the South, and probably 5 to 6 before I would say you get a really nice whiskey out of it. You might get some earlier, but like I say, with Wisconsin and stuff, a lot of times it's 5 years or older is where it starts to really take form. To be like, oh damn, so you're sitting on a lot. Where most businesses fail and crap out, you're trying to hold the lifeline longer at the baseline than most other places. So that's admirable, and like you said, tough to start looking at everything else when you're just worried about getting the next month and next year, making sure that everything lands right.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Sorry, I don't even look at that. I don't think there's when the prices of the older spots and then you have something like that, that's ridiculous. or what they used to be, and then you throw something like that, and it's like, no, I'll go back to my old the thing I said before about the 21-year-old Parliament. It's probably not in the 300 range now, or I mean, it might be right on that edge. But I remember when I used to get it, it was 120 to 170, and I didn't think I was getting, ripped off in what was happening. Now for 300, I'm going to tell you right now, I'm going to be disappointed by just about everything. I don't care what it is. You're setting the bar remarkably high for me, and anything over 300 and above, I don't know. I better be in awe.
Yes,
because I've been in awe by stuff that's $70. So come on now.
Or even in the $30 range.
Yeah, and I don't mean that negatively, because maybe if it was a legit 300, like we were talking about, like Dream Cask and other things that are 28 or 32-year-old whiskeys, I'm like, not saying I would spend it, but you can at least understand how the price point got to a higher spot on it. You know what I mean? Like, there's more time with stuff, and I can at least understand how someone would spin it for that. But like someone else said, after a certain time frame, there was a reason that whiskey wasn't picked beforehand, and it got to 22, 23, 28 years old.
Yeah. So I've spent I spent more time in liquor stores the last few weeks than I have in a very long time, and looking at spent time looking at the prices of stuff. And one of the things that really was, which goes kind of to Donald's point too, is seeing a bottle of Redbreast 27. Mm-hmm. I remember when that came out, it was $500 a bottle. And there were some people who are like, worth it, and they bought it. And I know some people who bought it. Mm-hmm. And there's people like me, like, no, it can't be worth $500 a bottle. Well, it's $1,100 now.
Yeah.
It's $1,100 for Redbreast 27. Which I think it's ridiculous. But looking at all the other ones with any age to it, and even some without age, but someone with age to it, they're all just so high, because I mean, I understand that there's a scarcity thing, but and I know that there's global prices change, et cetera, but I'm pretty sure that bottle of Redbreast 27 was already filled a couple years ago. I don't think it was just filled this week. I mean, kind of like the gas. The gas was already done. The gas was made. The gas was created.
You're selling me on futures.
Yes. Yeah.
Hi, I'm not in the futures game. I want this bottle.
Yeah, and there can be no way that 27-year-old Redbreast is worth $1,100. There's no way. I tried it. I tried. I bought a Irish place near me was selling 1 ounce bottles of it, and for it's like $30 a bottle, but that was way more economical and way easier to try that than it was to spend $500 on a bottle, and it was a great way to try it.
I just think for them, they might. What's 21 times? A little bit over, so they made a little bit more on it doing it that way, but let's be honest, they probably sold the bottle quicker.
Yeah.
If you're the store, that's a unique way to do something, because there's a lot of allocated places to do allocated things where they'll do samples of it instead, or it's for a benefit or something where they'll use it differently. So, sorry, I got off topic there, but it'll be interesting to see how much longer it takes before, like Kevin was saying, the smaller brands or the little brands start to turn and they start to have some issues and start to fall by the wayside. Because I've been expecting that to happen for like at least 3 years for this to start turning on a smaller scale. And it hasn't. There just seems to be continual investment by banks to start local distilleries or smaller ones, and you're only now starting to see some of them in the last 2 years start to kind of drop out or fade away, and not
or some are growing right now.
Yeah, well, and
but I think a lot with the smaller producers, though. I mean, the smart ones have been wary of putting everything into it, knowing that, hey, this stuff's got to change. But anyone who started off any place outside of Kentucky and saying that they're going to make Kentucky bourbon is a fool, or saying that I'm going to make better bourbon than Wild Turkey. No, you are not. You are not going to make better bourbon than Wild Turkey for that price point. It will not happen. You have to do something that is a little bit different, a little bit more unique, or do something with something unique about your flavors or your feel, or something that makes people want to try it. And those are the ones who are going to survive. I mean, the ones who are, which one's that, Mitch?
Same Old Moses. So this is MGP rye finished in an Amarone cask.
Oh,
right. Sorry, you were making your point in that. Yeah,
that's that, and the people who have done that, like, and especially the ones who are transparent about it, are the ones who are going to be okay. If you're buying someone else's whiskey, you're doing something with it, but you're not saying it's yours. They're all better off. But anyway, I don't want to see anybody close. But anyway, the point is, the smaller places that we know who are doing something different with the grains, different with the overall whiskey and the flavor, they will survive much longer than the others because they have already established themselves as being different now. So when the dust starts to settle, they're still not going to be the same as somebody else's whiskey. There is something different and unique about them that does already set them apart. And I think that will save them when things do change.
Well, that was what they were saying of some of the percentage rollback was, and I couldn't believe this, they're saying was lack of innovation in the more recent years. And I'm like, what are you talking? I'm like, on the smaller scale, they're like, but where the growth was in people doing unique styles or unique grain types. And I'm like, Oh, so like we've been saying, the more interesting stuff on smaller scale, or even on bigger scale, have started to work things in, or just purchased a brand that did that already, are seeing an uptick or payoffs for their diligence, in spite of all of the downturns that are happening or going to. I don't know, but that's okay. Sorry, I was trying to read two things at once. The screen was going a little slow and lurched on the side there.
So everybody's favorite Hoosier was talking to me once and told me that everybody in the distilling industry, I don't remember his exact word, but needs an angle, needs a gimmick, needs a differentiating factor that will let them persevere. And he thinks the middle people are going to go out, which I kind of agree with. You can have a very successful small regional brand, or you can have a very successful, super widespread national or global brand, but it's the middle people that are going to suffer because they are going to be the ones that are hardest to have that gimmick or angle, right? So, being able to say, hey, I made this, with grains that are grown here, or with grains that used to be grown here, or we developed our own grain like freaking Gary at Wood Hat does. That's a huge differentiating factor. Smoking your bourbon like they do in that area of the country is a huge thing for MB Roland, right? Like literally nobody else does that. And nobody else does that with their tobacco anywhere other than there, right? I'm trying to think of some of the other really fun ones. So I just had this thing called whiskey, which is, it's not, I know what you're talking about. It's made with whey, right? Yeah. And it's aged in a barrel. It's delicious, and there's nothing that tastes like it. That's their differentiating factor. Which I thought Stoli was going to make it with their bourbon theme park because I was like, that's their differentiating factor, right? If they could just get adult Disneyland, like if you got bourbon Disneyland, tell me you would not go, right? Like I'd go there, right? Like I moved away from Kentucky and I'd go back.
Well, okay, and Bourbon Disneyland. That's so tough because a lot of the distilleries are part of the experience, like the Disneyland experience. Like each place has their own thing. But I guess I don't know. You could go pretty in depth with a bigger place. I mean, you could have a whole section that was just cooperage. You could get nerdy in like a science factory or section of stuff if you were going. I'm just trying to pull people in more.
Even if it was just roller coasters that are safe enough to ride drunk, I'd have been thrilled, right? Like that's all it had to be. It could have been a kiddie roller coaster, and I'd been like, it's adult Disneyland, man, because it's like, oh, would you like to wait in line? Well, today's line sample is, and you're like, oh, this is the best line I've ever been in my life, right? Like
someone came around with whiskey samples while you're waiting in line.
Yeah, and then you get on, the little choo-choo train that goes like 7 miles an hour, and you're like, this is the most, greatest day of my life. Thank you, not Mickey. Like
what about
it could have
Surly?
Worked.
Surly's Mickey's cousin. He's upset, angry mouse.
Mucky Mouse. Mucky the rat. Yeah.
Excuse me. Sorry. I was cutting into me for a second there.
So wildly, this was happening back when I was in the cooperage because they would give us a yearly talk.
Well, you would think that would come out. They'd want to be years ahead of where the bourbon industry is just in general. They'd want to be, let's say, at least 5 years ahead of what the predictions are for planting and harvesting. If you're 10 ideally, but I mean, the way things really work, I think it's probably 5.
So, I mean, whiskey's weird, right? One of the biggest hindrances is the trees, right? You can't just, even if you only wait 60 years, which is way too little, it's still 60 years for an oak tree. And you're halving the amount you can get out between a 60 and an 80-year-old oak tree. So it's really hard to predict the future, and I think everybody predicted it wrong.
Well, I think there was a section of it was a new section of investment in whiskey that took place that hadn't been there on that scale before, and everyone thought everything like we mentioned the weird brands that were there just scaled themselves up, and I'm like, you didn't even do anything. Your whiskey's terrible. How did you win an award? What is going on? Yeah. Well, they got an infusion of money. They shouldn't have.
But not just investing in distilleries, investing in barrels became a thing, right? Like MGP stopped accepting new customers because effectively, investment banker, I don't know what they're called, investment people were like, you're telling me I can buy new make for like, less than $1,000 a barrel. And when it turns 4 years old, turn around and sell it for $3,000 a barrel, $2,000 a barrel. So I'm doubling or tripling my money in 4 years. What other investment does that? So they were just goo for gaga for it. Right. And that crashed about a year or two ago. And people stopped, doing that. Thank God. And it freed up MGP stock and lowered the price of that a little bit. But it was, whiskey's a bubble and it's popping.
Do you think it'll be quick over the next year? Like you'll see some other major things, or there'll be a slow pace like it has been in my mind?
It'll start ramping up, but I think it's going to take a year or two. Because, I mean, I am amazed that Waterford and My brain just stopped. Sorry.
Kentucky Owl.
Kentucky Owl lasted as long as they did. Because Waterford was an amazing experiment that, priced themselves out of the market, and Kentucky Owl lost the celebrity behind the name and then raised prices.
But between the two, between just those two, I think Waterford, well, there's already a plan, supposedly, when the stuff goes through receivership, if the founder gets to buy it back and have a lesson learned, I did it this way, it didn't work, versus Stoli with Kentucky Owl. What made the name Kentucky Owl was Dixon Dedman. So unless they were going to sell it back to him and bring it back, I don't know that Kentucky Owl could come back from that, because
I don't think it will.
Yeah.
No, I think that's one of the ones that just gets slid onto the shelf that is brand named owned by a major corporation.
I do think Kentucky Owl, the name, will live on. I don't think it'll be from Stoli, and I don't think it'll be in any form its current iteration.
I would hope Dixon Dedman could take ownership of the name. I could
see that happening. Dixon buying it back for a pittance and, going back to what it was. Or just, Heaven Hill owns probably more brands than most people put together.
Well, yeah,
they just have them on the shelf. So it's very possible that Heaven Hill could just be like, you know what, we like that brand and we're going to keep it in our pocket.
Well, that's what I mean. It's like there's something they hold on to, and it's been a while, and all of a sudden, we're bringing it back. I'm like, well, it's just someone's just had the rights and holding on to it for a while, and then think about that. Its usefulness in that manner up until now, where it's like, well, we can use this angle again and bring it back.
Yeah. And then Kevin's talking about, 52-week high for MGP versus 52-week low. It's more than double the difference. So that's part of that investment. People stop and buying everything that MGP could possibly make. And then all these smaller, iffier brands that don't have a differentiation, realizing that I'm competing with Bulleit. If I cannot make a better bourbon for cheaper than Bulleit, I'm going to lose.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I'm not a big fan of Bulleit, so there's a shot.
or be able to do something with that product.
Yeah.
Even something either simple or more extravagant for that.
Like putting in an Amarone cask, right? This is delicious. I would drink this every day rather than Bulleit, right?
Yeah, I would agree with you on that.
Yeah.
Sorry.
But they're not making, just rye or just bourbon. They're finishing it. They have their little niche they're filling. But everybody who's like, what do you got? I've got a straight bourbon.
Right. And that's a problem, is that there's people that's all they make is bourbon. They haven't done rye. They've only done gin or vodka out of necessity, not because they want to and can make a really good gin. But I think for me, there's more of call it a bourbon bubble. There's a spirits bubble also, which is I think it's much different. But within that, you got smaller bubbles. There's the bourbon bubble, but there's other ones that are still, they're not even tapped out yet. Rye is not tapped out yet. And people that can do something with that. And
Bosel. Yeah.
Tequila and mezcal is the fastest growing spirits category in America.
As soon as somebody in America takes over Mexico, so that way we can make it.
Say that like it's not a possibility. Which is terrible to think.
Just see what the cartel
the other day about annexing Canada and making Trudeau the governor, and it's just like, oh god, shut up.
Oh, Donald, that would be neat, Donald. I don't think they'll bring Jim out of retirement, but that would be awesome.
And once again, Kevin coming up with the questions, right? Like, what about your budget? Are you willing to pay extra?
It depends on how you budget that too, because for years, I mean, for the first 20 years of me doing whiskey stuff, it was on a much tighter budget. It just depends on what you're looking for, but you have a choice. It's just like beer. Yes, you could drink Miller Lite every day, but and if you want to, or you want to drink Miller Lite and Coors Light every day, and you're satisfied with that, so be it.
Mm-hmm.
But there's a lot of people who aren't, and they want to try something different. And you don't pound a case of stout. you just don't. And it's the same thing with some of these whiskeys. Yeah, you might go out and go buy a Buffalo Trace if you can find one nearby, but you go out and go buy a standard release of Buffalo Trace and use it for something. But you're going to have those other bottles that, not necessarily a luxury item, but something, because you couldn't just walk down to the store and get it, but it also is better. You're not just going to leave it out there for your brother-in-law to come over and throw over, 20 cubes of ice.
Like if we just going off of that, like a special release or something special is why you got it. I remember I was drinking Jack Daniels before we'd go out to shows with my friend Ryan all the time, because that's what he liked. And then one day I brought over like a Four Roses single barrel, and like he was like, "Oh my God, we were doing this wrong." So we'd have a couple of drinks of that, and then we'd switch over to the Jack for cost purposes, and already kind of numbed up before the show. But that was one of the things that first started me on the path, was trying something that was like, "Oh, this is significantly better." Yeah, I don't have to have a lot of it. We have a little bit, and
But one thing that's happened though in the last 4 years, especially, is brands like ASW. Mm-hmm. I never would have gotten that. Unless there was someone who was had the distribution for it, so they could take this great whiskey that's in Georgia and run it through a district and then send it to my house. That it's not that there's still some laws that need to change to get that into people's hands. But if those laws continue to change and do that, then okay, I gotta pay shipping for these 2 bottles directly from ASW, if that's where I'm ordering it from. But I look at the shipping costs and it's like, it's
you might as well get
$19, right? You talk to a buddy, it's like, all right, well, let's just get 4 of these and let's split the shipping. We can't get it around here, and it's less than the tax if we went down the street that, if we could buy it here in the first place. And you would have you'd have your bottles. Again, it's not for everybody. Not everyone's going to do that, but the same people who would go exploring outside of Coors Light and Miller Lite are, akin to the people that would explore outside of, just plain old Elijah Craig, which there's nothing wrong with it.
No,
but anyway, that's my opinion.
A really depressing statistic is that the top 10% of drinkers buy over 50% of alcohol sold.
Where does Wisconsin fit on that?
You are the top one right now. But when you are the top 10% of drinkers that are buying the top, over 50% of all alcohol sold, you are not a fabulously wealthy person buying as many $100 bottles as you possibly can. You're an alcoholic who's drinking cheap things to get through the day. And unfortunately, how do I put this? Those folks are passing away, and they're not being replaced with new alcoholics.
No, but a lot of the stuff that they're drinking
for your state,
a lot of stuff they're drinking is cheap. and
that's
just,
it is what it is. Like, that's something that just spirits producers have to come to terms with. Like, bottom shelf has a place because the massive amounts of units sold will support an entire distillery. But everything bad that comes along with that. And Waterford, I think, just proved that you can't, and Kentucky Ale just proved you cannot have a solely super premium product on the market.
I almost think the reach for super premium is such it's an insult word almost. You know what I mean? It is. You're two words that don't mean anything, and you're going to try to make it sound exciting. How about quality? I get it, but
So,
you know how I dislike some ads.
To Renita's comment, though, would you guys agree with this statement? And if you don't, I think it's great if you don't. The people that are hoarding it and sitting on those bottles will continue to hoard and sit on those bottles because it's not whiskey at that point. It's a trophy and or commodity. What do you guys think of that?
I think that's part of how some of the markets started to go up in that fashion. Let's say like 4 or 5 years ago, as it started to be viewed as a commodity. But I'm more of I probably only have 2 bottles that aren't open over there.
Same here.
And one of them's in James's place in Denver. It's just hanging out there so that I don't touch it.
So, I mean, I think some more people will open those bottles, but I also think like the sunk cost fallacy will come in where they're like, this used to be a $700 bottle. I'm not just going to open it, like it doesn't matter that the secondary market's gone and it's back to being a whatever $100 bottle. Like it could.
Or it'll be that they paid $700 for it.
Also that.
Yeah. So again, then it's a trophy. Look, I have all the colors of Weller behind me. Look, I have all of the E.H. Taylors. Look at my Peppies. And hey, if that's your thing, everyone's got to collect something. That's your thing. But if you were doing that so you could get the whole set, if you were trying to get the whole Hot Wheels set, it's because you weren't going to play with the Hot Wheels. You just wanted the whole set.
What I wanted to do was keep the empty bottles and use them like around the top on a shelf and stuff, like a bar, like the old memories I had of quality bottles, or shared them with someone or did something, and like keep those around, but they're empty now, obviously, because they've served their purpose. And tried to make it a little more sentimental too.
So it was my uncle who did a tour at Jim Beam, and while I was at Jim Beam, I think they had Booker's available to buy there. And people were buying it up because at the time it was really hard to get your hand on Booker's. And the person who was like, drink this. Don't just put it on your shelf. It looks gorgeous on your shelf, but I'm going to tell you the secret. Drink it, refill it with tea, and then put it back on your shelf, and it'll look just as good. And I was like, yeah, there you go.
Yeah. And you'll have
some of that. That's a really weird color for that whiskey. Usually it's really dark.
You can make dark tea.
No, I know. I'm just
There's more than one bag of Lipton in there, you cheapskate. Come on now.
Food coloring.
Water
with food coloring.
I
mean, if you're going to do that.
Yeah. Well, I guess you can hit the right caramelization color.
Yeah. Just go back to the pre-bottled in Bond Act. Spit in it. Throw some old stain in there.
Creosote, all that good stuff.
Yeah. Tire shavings.
Yeah. But, I mean, we're heading towards an hour, so I'll make a whole bunch of really controversial statements that could possibly be clipped.
This is awesome.
At the very end.
It's at the end. I want to hear these statements.
Right. Whiskey's in decline. The bubble has burst. The industry is going to not quite collapse, but come close. The middle distillers are going to go away. Smart, small regional distillers will be able to hang on, and the big boys will. We're going to see increased premiumization from the big guys, like the little things from Woodford, because that's going to be how they manage to make money. The basics, the Jim Beam Whites, the Kesslers that kept the lights on, they're going to keep going down in sales, and they're not going to be the thing that keeps the lights on anymore. It's just It's going to be sad to see some distilleries go, and it's going to be not sad to see other distilleries go. And it'll be kind of like, looking back, we'll be like, how did we not see the writing on the walls?
Mm-hmm.
What percentage?
We shouldn't have just made bourbon.
What percentage do you think is going to be to fail in, let's say, the next 4 years?
4? In
Yeah.
5, I'd be willing to say a third.
Okay, well that's what I was kind of going for, like a hit, because like you said, it'd be a little slow, and there is the explosion of distilleries in the last 10 years has been.
I'd say 2030, a third of distilleries are going to shutter, or brands, or be sold, or something like that.
I get what you mean. Especially that brand thing is neat, because my thing is going to be, when this does happen, there'll be a unique chance to acquire stills and equipment at a significantly. I'm just saying, if you're one of these people that can think further out, or could wait, or could be like, well, we're waiting for this, we know it's going to happen. We're going to get a 250-gallon still. When? We don't know, but it's coming up.
But then what are you going to do with that 250-gallon still?
Well, if you were planning on going that route anyways, you know what I mean? If you were say you're a smaller place and you were looking
but if the market's not there, unless you were eyeballing a still for doing something different. I've been eyeballing this still from this place that only makes bourbon, because I want to make brandy.
I don't think that. I just mean, like, there's a lot of distilleries, when they start on small ones, will go small on the stills. And then usually about 6 months in, they'll wish they have gone at least a scale setting up from what they started with, because they were afraid of kind of getting into it. So I meant more like, there's going to be a section that could really, there could be some people that take advantage of this, or does Vendome just come acquire their stills back and resell them later on and fuck people twice on them? That would be fucking neat too. We have just the thing for you here. Let us go bring you. Why don't we just sell you some land and a distillery?
Land and a bridge.
It's one of them things, like Mike said it, if you're smart enough, you can make money. If I forget who it was one of the Kennedys, I think. Gonna be drinking my mezcal to finish, since it's the fastest growing spirit in the country. You can make money in a recession as easily as you can in, a boom, if you know what you're doing and what's coming, right? So, yeah, bourbon is cyclical. It's died once. I don't think it's going to die to that extent again, but it's definitely going to swing down, and then it'll swing back up.
Everything has that, where people get, I want to say, the markets get greedy, and then there's a correction, and that happens. And for you, that's interesting. The THC market's usually a little bit more of like beer and cans and stuff, and not distilled spirits. So Mike and I have tried one that I would be intrigued to see that come around, but it won't come from that same brand. They're no longer around. But
that's beautiful.
I mean,
well, there'll be the acquisitions of ones that were brand names, and then, like you said, happened the last time it failed. There was brand acquisition and trading and stuff like that.
Well, or let's pretend we're in fantasy land that there's not going to be tariffs on all the stuff, which is going to change the pricing and change a lot of things dramatically. Let's say there wasn't, and there was the bubble burst in the United States. There's a whole lot of overseas markets that are untapped, that it would all go over there. I mean, there's entire countries, like they haven't even begun to tap India. I mean, that's a massive market to send stuff over there. So if if you weren't getting hit on the cost on all that stuff, and the bubble burst here and people just weren't buying it, it'd be a great time to live someplace else to go buy all this stuff because they'll send a shitload of it over there.
With the sheet. Oh, the one we had, Renita, is it was put in the gin basket, or sort of like a gin basket. It was in tubing. That's way to phrase how that went.
The way it was described, I think the still was just turned into a huge water pipe.
To some extent, maybe.
Yes.
But, yeah, it was different, and the smell was unique, but the taste was way better than the smell.
Was horrendous.
If you're not into that type of thing, yes, it was. It had a strong odor.
It was a bad 1970s concert, is what it smelled like.
Yeah,
but did not taste like that at all.
No, it didn't. It's just like,
Andy Rowland has that hemp bourbon, and it
tasted like you're at the Molly Hatchet, Black Oak, Arkansas, Ted Nugent Summer Jam, and you're with your older brother's friend who you all rode there in the back of the El Camino with air shocks and Krager SS mags. Only Krager SS mags in the back because you had slot mags in the front because you couldn't afford the other two Kragers. I'm profiling.
That's pretty good. But that and my question is, Mitch, would distilling weed actually work to the extent of the outcome, or would it destroy it? I don't know.
I don't know what like THC.
I just don't know if it breaks down in the process, or because you're going higher than beer and other stuff.
I would think you'd have to add it later in the process.
That would be my guess, but I don't care about weed at all. I'm going to be 100% honest. Like, it's just not my thing. I've never.
It was just a weird.
Never researched it. Never thought about it. It's just right. It's like asking me, like, "Hey, Mitch, if you wanted to be a mechanic," it's like, well, I'm going to stop you right there. I do not want to be a mechanic. So.
I like Mitch has got boundaries. I'll fucking set those right here.
It's like a weird ABC after school special.
I said no.
No, Mr. Jenkins, I don't want to be a mechanic.
No means no. It's just
come over here, kid. I want to teach you about torque wrenches.
You gotta set them right. All right. Well, we're a little over an hour, so I think that's probably good for this evening. We'll let people get back to their lives and get some sleep before they start work the next morning. I want to thank everyone out there for stopping in, and we had a great talk. And thank you for everyone in the chat for all the chirping and chiming in you did. That was fantastic. You guys had some great questions tonight, so thank you for doing that. We really appreciate it. What did I say? Sorry, I read Donald's thing and I had to slow down for a second. Like, I'm not quite sure if I caught that or not, but I did. So, catch us next week, and we will be back. Sorry, my computer's going a little slow. What did you get to the Yak Attack, Mike?
I did. I had that a little bit ago, and now I'm on the Whiskey in My Ring Jack Daniel's Rye barrel proof. Finishing up on that.
I like that one a lot. A lot of nice depth, bold, rich flavors in that Yak Attack one. I dig that one quite a bit. So, well, like I was saying, thank you everyone for stopping in. We will see you next week. Remember, it is not the size of the den that matters. It is the love of whiskey. Cheers, everyone.
Cheers.
Cheers.
Thank you.